Now, Lloyd has written a huge number of books, both for academics and for a more popular audience, including a very popular one on the Persians. But the one that we're going to be talking about today is this one, the Cleopatras, from just a couple of years ago, which has already been translated into several languages. And we're very lucky to have him here because he seems to be away on book tours all the time. So we've pinned him down. So Lloyd, it's absolutely great to see you again, and I'm very much looking forward to our chat.
Oh, thanks, Helen. It's fantastic to be back in Edinburgh. It really is. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, it's great to see you. So, the Cleopatras. I mean, the one that we all know, of course, is Cleopatra the Seventh. But the fact that she's the seventh suggests that there are 6 more of them.
Precisely.
Why did you choose to write about all of them?
It's because I think that Cleopatra the Seventh, the Liz Taylor Cleopatra, has kind of been marked out as this almost kind of like lone wolf character. Now, she was a remarkable woman, there's no doubt about it in my mind. She was a mover and shaker. I mean, she came within inches of becoming really the ruler of a Roman world. But she actually stands on the shoulders of a series of women who came before her, mothers, grandmothers, aunts, and so forth. And I thought it would be so much more interesting to put her into her family context and to see that she is not this kind of aberration of a woman who comes from nothing. But actually what we've got in Ptolemaic Egypt, this is the dynasty that ruled in Egypt. They were Greek-speaking dynasty between 330 BCE. Essentially, we have there a family where women were allowed to rise to positions of real power, not just power behind the throne, which we see in a lot of ancient societies, but actual genuine power. And I thought, to explore their lives would be interesting to put her into a contect.
It's ancient girl power, isn't it?
It really is, absolutely is.
And how unusual was that, I mean, in an ancient patriarchal society?
Women have always had opportunities through soft power to get their points across. I mean, nobody, in a way, had more intimate contact with a ruler than his wife, of course, and I never write out pillow talk is an important part of all of this, but they were never recognized positions of authority. And therefore, in many ancient societies, Egypt is a good example of this, there was no word for queen. You could simply be the king's wife or the king's mother or king's daughter, but they had no vocabulary for queenship whatsoever. Under the Ptolemies, we do see queenship coming into its own. So they took the Greek word basilis, king, and changed it into a feminine, basilissa. And so we have the rise of the basilissa, a recognized court and therefore political authority. So I think they are kind of ahead of the game in many respects. And really, we don't see that kind of queenship re-emerge until late medieval period, 16th century even, which is often called the Age of Queens as well. So they're really quite unusual in a broader context of how women can use power and agency.
And did the fact that Egypt has queens, did that help ordinary women? Was there any sense that the status of ordinary women was raised because, the role model of the queen, or are they just so sort of stratospherically different that
they are so far apart. However, it should be said that generally the position of women in Egypt, in pharaonic Egypt, right the way through to the Greek period, was a lot better than anywhere else in the ancient world. So women in Egypt, from time immemorial, from the Old Kingdom onwards, had the ability to earn their own money, to divorce on their own terms, to organize and maintain businesses and so forth. And, if you compare that to, say, the lives of women in classical Athens, where basically their lives were virtually akin to the women of Afghanistan today under the Taliban. I mean, they were so controlled, so so oppressed. So generally, women in Egypt had a better time of it than anywhere else, even than Roman women, I think. But I can't say that the Cleopatras themselves were crusaders for women's rights in any way. I don't think that they would have even thought of that.
No, that's not the image you get certainly from your book. But one of the things that struck me was the way they sort of present themselves in this non-binary way, in a way that feels very modern, actually. So they're sort of both warrior kings, they're pharaohs, but also sort of nurturing mothers. And it sort of reminded me of Elizabeth I, that sort of non-gendered way. I mean, is that just the way that powerful women in the past have always had to?
I think it's the way they've kind of had to operate, absolutely. I mean, in a world where all the political language is masculine, they have to kind of find that within them. So in the Hellenistic world, a king had to be an able judge and lawgiver, and he had to lead troops into warfare. And the Cleopatras follow that example. So, it's something that becomes natural to them, that they understand. They must be warrior queens as well as anything else. But of course, what they also are is that they are all the kind of dynastic wombs as well, because of course, they're supposed to. Their main purpose in life is to beget children, for the next generations and so forth. So you're right. I mean, there is this kind of toing and froing of gender identities, and you see it in their portraiture as well. We all think of, Liz Taylor as Cleopatra, but I can tell you now, Cleopatra VII and the rest of the Cleopatras did not look anything like Liz Taylor. And in fact, in their portraiture, they deliberately went for a rather kind of masculine look. So Cleopatra VII's last portrait coin that we have of her, she's on the flip side with Mark Antony on the back, and she really does look like Mark Antony in drag. And the reason why she's done that is this portrait has to appeal to the Roman world, and she has to say, look, I'm a contender. So if she were going to show us as Egyptian woman, that wouldn't have the kudos that she really needs. And we get a lot of these images of the Cleopatras, Cleopatra III in particular, where they just look kind of masculine and heavy set, rather formidable. But that really is what they needed to get across to their subjects, but mostly to their own family, in fact.
I mean, another thing that struck me is the sheer theatricality of these people. Everything is stage managed, larger than life and ostentatious. So at one point you compare them to Elvis or to wealthy Russian oligarchs, or the fashionistas of Alexandria traveling up and down the Nile on their super yachts. I love that idea of their transport. And kind of you think, the Kardashians, they've got that sort of vibe, haven't they? But also there's something very modern, it seems to me, about being so aware of the optics in every situation. So can you say a little bit more about that? And were they the first to realize that dazzling people is better than fighting them?
Well, this idea of kind of the theatricality, the stage management of politics, is something that we see with the rise of the Hellenistic kingdoms after the death of Alexander. Now, Alexander was a pretty good PR man for himself anyway, so he was quite at home with that. And I think the Ptolemies really picked up on it. But it is quite a huge change from the way in which royal ideology had run before. So if we think about the pharaohs of Egypt, they were unapproachable, hidden away in their palaces. Nobody saw a pharaoh. And likewise, the great kings of Persia, nobody ever got to see them either. So the mystique of monarchy. And while the Ptolemies don't actually have a kind of, a sort of British, touchy-feely, shaky-handy kind of policy, they did understand the importance of being seen, and being seen on a grand scale. So you're right. I mean, everything about the Ptolemies was rather nouveau riche and vulgar, and yet devastatingly effective. Everything they did, from their clothing, even their bodies, they embraced a Greek concept which we call trouphe, and trouphe means excess. But here it's excess in a good way. So like they flashed the cash. They were kings of bling. They were all of them. including Cleopatra VII, very fat. Even their bodies reflected their wealth and status. There's this most fantastic Roman description. A senator comes to Egypt, to Alexandria, and he sees Ptolemy VIII, who had the nickname, by the way, of Potbelly, so you can understand what he was like. And this Roman writes back to the Senate and says, I can't believe I've seen the king of Egypt walking around the streets of Alexandria, puffing and sweating underneath his diaphanous caftan, he says, you know, and I've never seen anything so grotesque. You know, this is what, but all of them were large people. But it was something that they deliberately fostered to say, look, we're here, take notice of us.
And in the ancient world, where it would be unusual to be large, most people are just, you know, hand to mouth.
Yes, absolutely. Most people are living on a subsistence diet, just try to get through to tomorrow, just enough bread there. But so the Ptolemies' display of bodily corpulence was all part of that idea of, look how wealthy Egypt is.
And I was going to ask what people made of them. I mean, you've mentioned this Roman already, but did they not just think, these are strange people?
Yes, I think I think so. Maybe not so much in Greek-speaking Alexandria and the Nile Delta, but I think as you went down the Nile into modern-day Luxor, so that's ancient Thebes and so forth, at that sort of heart of old Egypt, I think their Egyptian subjects looked kind of askance at them and thinking, you know, who are these people? You know, they were, after all, they were colonizers. You know, they came in, they instilled Greek mores and customs. They tried to kind of find a common language with the Egyptians, but by and large, they kind of failed. They sort of invented a common god, Serapis, who was a mixture of the god Zeus and the Egyptian bull god Apis, and thought, well, we can have this kind of, you know, synergy of a deity, but it never took off at all. So they tried, and I do think the common people of Egypt, did look at them and just think these people are weird. But the Ptolemies made no attempt to kind of, you know, integrate themselves into Egyptian society either. So they never spoke Egyptian. They only spoke Greek. Cleopatra VII, our last one, she was the only Ptolemy to ever learn the Egyptian language, and that served her enormously well. You know, I mean, a great benefit to her. But the others, no, had no interest. They looked to the Greek world. They were Hellenized completely. And even the city of Alexandria itself, at the time, was called Alexandria pros Aegyptu, so Alexandria that is next to Egypt. They didn't even see it as integral to Egypt, you know?
Hugely contemptuous.
Huge, yeah.
But in many respects, the Ptolemies are the archetypal dysfunctional family. I mean, you and I share a love of Jerry Springer.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, they are worse than anything you would ever see on Jerry Springer.
Yeah.
I mean, the women are continually at each other's throats. Brothers marry sisters. I mean, incest is a major part of the way that this family operates. And you have a great line. The family that sleeps together keeps together. Although it has to be said that even marrying your sister doesn't stop you fighting against her all the time. So what on earth are they thinking in this incestuous marriage?
So the incest thing is of fundamental importance to the Ptolemaic period. And I need to explain. The incest here, very often brother and sister, so very, you know, first person incest, what sociologists have called the yuck factor, because we have an instinctive need to say, ugh, that's awful. But it served a real political purpose for them. And I need to emphasize as well, this is not just incest in name, this is a lived sexual experience that they have, intended to have children, of course. So there is evidence that some pharaohs of the previous millennium had incestuous relationships with daughters. Ramesses II, we certainly know, had a daughter by his daughter, for instance. But it hadn't really, it wasn't as prevalent as early Egyptologists thought. But the Greek Ptolemies, they really take to it straight away. And in fact, the first example we have of this is in the second generation of the Ptolemies. Ptolemy II marries his sister Arsinoe II, and he deifies her. And this is the real important thing to remember. The Ptolemies used brother-sister incest to rise themselves above any common people at all, even the aristocracy, because they drew on the theology of both Egypt and of Greece, because there we've got a series of deities, of course, who are incestuous. So in Egypt we have Isis and Osiris, and then in Greece we have Zeus and Hera. And so what the Ptolemies were doing were basically saying we are part of this divine court, really. They placed themselves there. Now, how this actually plays out in reality is so difficult to know, because if we look at historic dynasties that have practiced degrees of incest, and I suppose the one we know most about is the Habsburgs of Central Europe and Spain. So there we have like 150 years of tending to be uncle-niece sexual unions, okay, so second degree incest. Well, by the time we get to Habsburg monarchs like Carlos II of Spain in the early 17th century, I mean, the poor boy was simply a vegetable. I mean, he could barely speak, he was deformed, he had so many sicknesses. And of course, that is the result. But here with the Ptolemies, we've got 300 years of first-degree incest. So what was going on? And the difficulty is, of course, nobody's really writing about these things, because if they did, I mean, they wouldn't live to write another day. And of course, Egyptian art is completely heroizing all the time, as is Greek art. So we don't see that, and we don't have the bodies. We have no bodies whatsoever. So we can't do even DNA tests or anything. Not that might even show, obviously, emotional or mental difficulties are not going to be evident there. But I can't believe that in a 300-year period that some kind of physical and emotional disturbance would have gone on within the family, and that might explain some of the egregious behavior that we get.
Yeah. I mean that, again, that's so far removed from the image we have of Elizabeth Taylor.
Yeah, completely. Although there is a really
picture.
lovely line, that Rex Harrison takes Elizabeth Taylor in his arms at one point and shakes her, and he says, who are you to tell me how to rule the world? You, the descendant of centuries of inbreds. And I thought, okay, Hollywood does get it right sometimes, but they don't play much more on that.
No, that's a brief moment. So, again, amongst ordinary people, am I right in thinking that brother-sister marriage, actual brother-sister marriage, was not uncommon?
No, it wasn't common at all in the Ptolemaic period.
Oh, was it not?
But what happens is, in the Roman period, it goes crazy.
Because the papyrus.
Yeah, absolutely. The Roman papyri constantly. So I don't know what happens after the death of Cleopatra VII, and the Roman colonization. What goes on there? Whether the Egyptians are thinking, well, didn't we used to all sleep with our brothers and sisters? Doesn't that make us more Egyptian? And maybe that's what they're doing with it. But it doesn't happen beforehand. And then, of course, it stops in late antiquity and with the coming of Islam. But yeah, for the whole Roman period, and you're right, the documentation is really very clear about it.
Yeah. I want to turn to theology of the Cleopatras. Now, I know we don't normally sort of think in terms of theology with these ancient people, particularly the Ptolemies, but I mean, they do seem to have identified themselves, as you said already, with the goddess Isis. And in Egyptian iconography, it's common for them to form part of a sort of a ruling triad, isn't it? You've got the mother, the father, and then the child. So where do these beliefs come from? And do you think that they had any kind of influence on emerging Christian ideas? Particularly, I'm thinking of Mary with the child, similarities with Isis, Hathor, things like that.
Yes, absolutely. I think theology is the appropriate term to think about religious messages. I think we should talk about the theologies of ancient peoples. I think the Egyptians had a very keen sense of their own theology. I mean, there were multiple ancient stories of the creation of the world, for instance. There was no dogma per se, no one sacred text that the Egyptians went to. And I get a sense with the Ptolemies, when they came into Egypt, I mean, this was all completely foreign to them. And so they were guided and steered, I think, by the priests, whom they courted quite assiduously. And one thing that the Ptolemies really did was invest in the building of temples. So when you go to Egypt as a tourist today and you go down south, many of the great temples that you'll see, Edfu, Komombo, Philae, these are all Ptolemaic structures. And the Ptolemies preserve on the walls of those temples the best texts, theological texts we have from the whole of Egypt. So without the Ptolemies, we wouldn't have actually our depth of knowledge about religious practice in Egypt. So we have the story of Isis and Osiris and the birth of Horus, for instance, really embedded in those texts there. So I think they were guided by the priests, but then they could use this theology too. You know, Cleopatra VII is a really good example of this. So, for instance, we all know about her relationship with Julius Caesar, and she has a son by him, Caesarion, little Caesar. When Caesar is assassinated in 44 BCE, Cleopatra takes her son back to Egypt. They've been in Rome together. And she immediately goes into a kind of overdrive to publicize the fact that this boy is the son of the dead Julius Caesar. And how does she do it? Well, she uses Egyptian theology. So she presents herself as Isis, the mother goddess. Caesarion is presented as Horus, the god who ascends the throne, and that's a time-honored tradition. Every pharaoh is the living Horus. But then the murdered Julius Caesar is presented as Osiris, who, of course, in the myth was murdered as well. You know, so she plays on the theology of Egyptians really well. And in a temple near Thebes called Medamud, which has now disappeared, unfortunately, but you know, it was sort of torn down in the Victorian period. But we do have early Victorian sketches of reliefs there. We see Cleopatra giving birth to her son, which is really unusual. We never see these kind of intimate moments in Egyptian art. And she's kind of there with all of these midwives who are goddesses, and the child comes out. But what's interesting is Cleopatra also stands observing herself giving birth. So she's there with the goddess Mut, who's the mother goddess, and the god Amun, watching herself give birth. And basically what she's saying there is this child is generated only from the mother, which is really fascinating, absolutely. And it's the only time we see it in Egyptian art, as far as I know. And it's really quite a statement. And of course, you know, I mean, this has been written about by many people that, yes, the Isis cult in Egypt was really the last bastion of paganism across the whole of the Roman Empire, you know. And I think that's because I think it did provide women with access to the divine, which they needed. You know, Isis is the ultimate mother figure, and of course we have so many figurines of her seated with Horus on her lap and suckling the milk and all of this kind of thing. You can really see how the Mary image develops out of that. I would never say that they're identical, of course, but you know, there is something that's going on there, definitely.
Oh, fascinating. So you're going to read us a little section. I'll leave you to introduce it and read your bit.
Okay, so this is...
and then we're going to have questions from the audience.
Yeah,
so if you have questions, start thinking of them.
This is a bit from chapter 18, which chapter 18 looks at the relationship between Mark Antony and Cleopatra VII. So I'll read a little for you. I'm going to start with Shakespeare. The barge she sat in, like a burnished throne burned on the water. The poop was beaten gold, purple the sails, and so perfumed that the winds were lovesick with them. The oars were silver, which to the tune of flutes kept stroke, and made the water which they beat to follow faster, as amorous of their strokes. For her own position, it beggared all description. She did lie in her pavilion, cloth of gold of tissue, or picturing that Venus where we see the fancy outwork nature. On each side her stood pretty, dimpled boys, like smiling cupids, with diverse coloured fans, whose wind did seem to glow the delicate cheeks which they did cool, and what they undid, did. William Shakespeare's evocative description of Cleopatra's love boat, taken from his magnificent 1607 tragedy Antony and Cleopatra, which was inspired by Thomas North's 1579 English translation of Plutarch's Lives, captures to perfection Cleopatra VII's unrivaled flair for the whimsical and the theatrical. The meeting between Antony and Cleopatra at Tarsus marked a paradigmatic shift in her style of governance, as the carefully coded use of pharaonic myth and image she had employed during the Caesar years gave way to an ostentatious use of spectacle. Flashy Ptolemaic-style Pompeii was the hallmark of the Antony and Cleopatra era. Lavish Mediterranean cruises, epic banquets, hard drinking, dressing up, passionate breaking up and making up, city center parades and water pageants all sent out a message to the Roman world in which the lovers declared, "We're doing it our way." Once, with Caesar, Cleopatra had played the role of an educated and fascinating urbane woman, which indeed she was. But with Mark Antony, the other Roman in her life, she opted to perform a very different sort of role and acted the part of a razzle-dazzle showgirl. It spoke to Antony's taste. Ever the politician, by the time she sailed up the river Cydnus, Cleopatra had carefully weighed the evidence and come to the cold-hearted conclusion that Antony's star was in the ascendancy and that he was worth pursuing. Cleopatra understood what made Antony tick. He was popular with his troops, he drank copious amounts of wine and liked to party. He was an inveterate womanizer. He was poorly educated and lacked intellect. He was a Philhellene, but only superficially so. He was vulgar, ambitious, sexy, and, as Cleopatra realized, he was completely strapped for cash. She had long been aware of Antony's designs on the East, and although she was not intrinsically invested in Eastern affairs per se, she knew that she could get Antony on her side if she were to offer him the finances he needed to invade Parthia, his chief goal in life. In the extraordinary Pompeii with which she wowed Antony at Tarsus, the gilded poop of the ship, the silver oars, the purple perfumed sails, the fancy-dressed extras fanning her with colorful ostrich plumes, Cleopatra played the oriental queen to the letter. Venus was come to feast with Bacchus, wrote Plutarch, for the common good of Asia. Antony brought into it all. The 28-year-old queen, at the height of her charms, dressed as the goddess Aphrodite herself, won over the 42-year-old Antony, dressed in the leopard skin cloak of the god Dionysus, in an instant, and bedded him on the first night. He awoke the next morning a man completely smitten. According to Suetonius, sometime later, Antony wrote to Octavian in Rome, asking why he had turned so hostile. Quid te mutatut? Quod regina meneo? Why are you so changed towards me? Is it because I screw the queen? Mark Antony, who had pursued tepid affairs with a string of rather stolid middle-class Roman mistresses, including one he had made his wife, the forceful Fulvia, loved the idea of romancing a genuine, blue-blooded and passionate queen. He was mesmerized by her and by all the trappings that came with her status.
Thank you, Lloyd. And I think that's a great illustration of your sparkling prose. I mean, you know, it just sparkles along. I really enjoyed reading it. And the way you sort of unpack that woman who, different man, different strategy, just ruthless ambition all the way through.
And, you know, I think if things had gone differently in Cleopatra's life, she could have turned that in multiple ways. So if Julius Caesar hadn't been successful over Pompey the Great, I think she would have gone for Pompey.
Oh, yeah.
And there's even all these hints that even at the last, after Mark Antony commits suicide, she tried to make a pass at Octavian. She tried to play to him as well, you know? Yeah, she was determined.
Wow, it's her superpower, isn't it? So we have plenty of time for questions. Would anybody like to start us off? Oh, wow, lots. I think somebody's got yes, a mic.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about the incest thing, because somebody has to. There have been a lot of scientific studies on communities that practice incest. And, I mean, what do you think of the suggestion that it's just not plausible that they actually were each other's parents for 300 years, that they just wouldn't have genetically worked, that it was really a fiction and there were really other people having the children, because there are all sorts of reasons why this is very difficult. I mean, if they're not brought up together, it's easier, but there are lots of studies that are saying that just the fertility of societies that practice this is very, very low. And as you say, it doesn't take very long for the line to become so degenerate that they're not really able to practice.
The evidence for the direct line of inheritance only suggests brother-sister marriage. Occasionally, that misses out one generation because there's a lack. And at one point, a foreign princess, actually Cleopatra I, has to be brought in from Syria because there's not a sister for the pharaoh to marry. But really, in the period of the Cleopatras, from 150 BCE to 30 BCE, we can just see purely brother-sister marriage. And that's echoed in even the epithets that they give each other. Philadelphos, brother, sister loving, for instance, are the words that they give. And people have debated, in ancient Egypt, for instance, you could call yourself somebody's sister, and that could mean beloved. But the evidence is far too strong here that these were absolute incestuous sexual relations. Well, I mean, we can't, we don't have... well, no, actually, she wasn't at all promiscuous. None of these Cleopatras were promiscuous. None of them had multiple lovers at all. They were actually very conservative and actually only give their bodies to the males that they were married to, their brothers on the whole. And in fact, Cleopatra, I mean, the best mud you can throw at her is that she was a serial monogamist. But she certainly didn't have multiple lovers at all. And in fact, Cleopatra VII was the only one of the Ptolemaic queens to reject brother marriages. Now, she had to marry her two younger brothers at different stages in her life, but she had no children by them. And that, I think, is because, like many of the other Cleopatras, she just saw them as weak, and she had a far greater ambition to get herself into Roman politics, and that's why she went with these outsiders for the only time. But even she went through the marriage ceremonies of union with her brothers because it was the dynastic way. And of course, we get the same things in other societies. I mean, in your era, I mean, we've got Berenike and Agrippa, who are
maybe they're brother and sister, and certainly there were rumors about them, but yes, it's not entirely sure. More questions? There's some more on this row.
Thank you very much. I had another question about incest, but slightly different. You said that the incestuous relationships placed them, or at least part of the message was it placed them amongst the gods, because the incestuous relationship was a mark of divinity. I'm just curious if you have any insight into why would that be? Why would it be that people thought that there was something divine about an incestuous relationship?
I think it's something about what they would have seen as purity of bloodline more than anything else. So any attempt to come into that and to weaken the Ptolemaic line through a marriage with an outsider would only be seen as diluting that divine blood. So there's something about divine purity. The gene pool, as it were. Little do they realize, of course, that they're polluting that gene pool every time they, not only they're polluting it, they're diving in the deep end. But they don't understand that at all. So I think ultimately it's about blood.
There's another one just here, just in front.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm interested in your source material. Did you find anything that scholars haven't looked at in detail before?
Yes,
how did you source it?
A lot, because many people who have written on Cleopatra VII have taken the classical sources and really dismissed the Egyptian sources because they very often don't have languages or whatever. I studied hieroglyphs when I was like 18, 19, and demotic as well. So I went back to a lot of the original sources, even to the point where we've been able to identify Cleopatra VII's signature on one document. It's not terribly exciting, but it's a document which is allowing some wine shipments from Chion wine to come into Alexandria to go to Mark Antony's best friend. And she signs that at the bottom, Gnathaino, make it so, which at least shows us, she's dotting the T, she's dotting the I's and crossing the T's. She's a bureaucratic queen. But the most important thing I think I've discovered is that there's been this huge debate about Cleopatra's mother, you see, for the longest time, because people didn't know who she was. So all this kind of mythology has grown around it. Was she a concubine of Ptolemy XII? Netflix had a documentary last year in which they classed a black actress as Cleopatra. And black feminist scholars in particular have claimed Cleopatra. And claiming is a very powerful thing, of course, for ancient figures, Cleopatra, Alexander the Great. Groups do this, and they have absolutely every right to do it. But the fact is that those who have studied Cleopatra were not looking in the right places. In the Egyptian evidence, the mother of Cleopatra is clear to see. So on the temples are at Edfu, for instance, she's there with her husband, Ptolemy the 12th, and she is, of course, Cleopatra VI, Tryphina is her full name, and we know that she gives birth in 74 BCE, so we can date Cleopatra's birth there. And she herself was the daughter of Cleopatra V. And so she was an absolute down-the-line Ptolemaic princess, we don't need to look anywhere else to find a mother for Cleopatra, because she's actually there all the time. Yeah.
I think there was another one. Yeah. Yes.
So considering how Alexandria was a center of knowledge in this period, with the museum, the library, and so many philosophers and scientists, I wanted to ask if the Cleopatras had any particular role in terms of patronage of all of these arts and sciences.
Yes, absolutely. Knowledge was another way in which the Cleopatras and the Ptolemaic dynasty as a whole showed its trufe. By the acquisition of texts, by the invitation of major scholars in all fields of study into Alexandria. The museum, and the library was something of great pride for the Ptolemies themselves. And these women were pretty learned. They were all literate. Not only literate, they actually delved into things as well. They really enjoyed the very process of just learning. The Ptolemies, had sort of instigated a very draconian approach to gathering knowledge. So when ships would arrive in the harbor of Alexandria, you probably know, there was an edict which stated that the ships would be searched for papyrus documents. And if they were considered to be of literary importance, they would be taken to the library and copied, and then the originals would be returned. Although after a while, the Ptolemies got wise to this and actually kept the originals and gave the copies back to them. So this is why, in Alexandria, we had everything from, the plays of Aeschylus and Euripides, we had the works of Demosthenes, we had the new burgeoning Latin literature that was coming out. We had, of course, the Septuagint, the Hebrew Bible in Greek, all of this. And that's why, the burning of Alexandria in the Alexandrian War, when Julius Caesar came into to the city, still gives classicists sleepless nights even today. Because we've lost so much in that we could never replace, of course. Yeah.
Other questions? At the back there. Oh.
How much is known?
No, you're on.
I think it's working.
Yeah.
How much is known about the other Cleopatras and what was their influence?
We know a great deal. One of the things we do not lack in Egyptian history are sources. And I'm working with all sorts of sources for this book. So inscriptions in Greek and in hieroglyphs, Demotic and hieratic papyri, Greek papyri, Latin poems, iconography, you name it. There is never one, there's no great sort of like equivalent of Xenophon or Herodotus for the Hellenistic world. So as a Hellenistic historian, you have to think widely anyway and bring in everything. But yes, they are very transparent in the sources, I'm glad to say.
I think the book is fairly sort of well organised
Yeah.
into what we know about each
Absolutely.
of them.
I try to give each of them their fair share of the limelight, because each of them are fascinating women. Every one of them deserves her own time in the spotlight, really. Yeah.
Utterly horrifying.
Yeah.
At the back.
Desire, I have a question about political leadership. I really liked your opening angle on moving from a singular Cleopatra to thinking about a tradition of 7 generations of strong women. How did the Cleopatric tradition transform rulership in Egypt? Did they have a particular impact on the machinery of politics in ancient Egypt?
I wish I could say yes, it did, that this suddenly became a more enlightened way of thinking about women's rule. But as I mentioned, really this was an aberration. 150 years of female rule, and then it declines again. It doesn't go on into the Roman imperial period. We still get, our Livias and our Agrippinas having to do things from behind the throne. So unfortunately, it doesn't last. And I think a lot of that is because, of course, the Romans had such a negative opinion of Egypt following its conquest, because it was such a serious threat to Roman hegemony. They decided, even during the life of Cleopatra, to defile her image, and obviously anything that came out of Egypt, therefore, was bad, Orientalist, superstitious, paganish, and also the fact that it's ruled by women. How can this ever be good? So the Cleopatras never had a legacy. They could never run with it. And this has been part of the historiography of the Cleopatras in the last 100 years. I mean, the amount of stuff I plowed through saying, oh, Cleopatra the Third or Cleopatra the First, they were Hyrcanian tigers or Lady Macbeth characters and so forth. Oh, come on, let's get beyond the cliche. What are these women being blamed for? For being women? That's not good enough. We can't do that. And that's why, really, I decided to write this book, because I thought, let's take these women seriously as political contenders, because the Romans certainly did. Cleopatra the Seventh, I think, was one of those names, like Hannibal, that kept the Roman Senate up at night, without a doubt. Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, yeah, over there.
Oh, this lady first.
Okay. I'm sure this. I'm wondering if you have a favorite of the Cleopatras, or one who
No, I do,
was interesting, getting into the weeds about.
I do. The one I really like is, her name is Cleopatra V Berenike. And so she's a little Cleopatra between big Cleopatras, but I like her because, she has a really kind of tough life. None of these women have it easy, to be honest. She's raised at court. Her father and her mother are divorced on the orders of her grandmother, Cleopatra III, who is ruthless. She's raised in the court of Cleopatra III, basically an orphan. She is forced to marry her uncle, Ptolemy X, by whom she begets a daughter, Cleopatra VI. And then later on in life, after he dies, she has to marry her father, who returns to court. So she has a union with her father, which is not a sexual union, but in fact, it's wonderful because he was a complete stranger to her, but somehow they find a way of being in which he instructs her how to rule, essentially, or somehow they work it out together, because he doesn't have much clue, really. And after his death, he leaves Egypt to her, and she rules for just 11 months on her own. That is the first woman in recorded history who has her sole rule. Now, unfortunately, and this is, it tells us a lot about the gendered way of thinking. Within 11 months, she had married again. She had married because even she could not conceive of a world in which she wasn't called the wife of somebody. And unfortunately, the marriage is an absolute disaster. This Ptolemaic prince who's been on the peripheries is brought back from Rome. He's about 16, she's about 45, and he murders her on the wedding night. So not a good ending. But in between that, I think for those 11 months, you really see a woman of enormous consequence doing the work, single-handedly holding Egypt together. I think she's undervalued, so I like her. Cleopatra V, remember the name.
And we don't know how any of these felt about any of this, do we? I mean, being forced to marry your brother. all these alliances.
Absolutely. This is the thing, I posit some of these questions in the book. What did the Cleopatras think about being told, when they're young girls, okay, well, your duty is now you're going to marry your brother. Did they treat it with revulsion? Was it like the norm? Did they feel a sense of pride, duty, whatever it was? We just don't know. That's the kind of stuff that never gets recorded, of course.
Yeah. More questions. One at the front here. Oh, well,
Thank you. Hello, that was fantastic. My question has to do with, you mentioned that the Cleopatras were an aberration in terms of like the role of women in Egypt. What about Hatshepsut as the female pharaoh? And were they?
In a way, Hatshepsut, who's 1,500 years before, is the ultimate aberration because she just comes out of nowhere. And has to work in a system which is purely set up for men. So, in her iconography, she shows herself sometimes with a male body, sometimes with a female body, sometimes with a female body wearing the pharaonic beard. And there's no way that she can even call herself queen because there's no word for it. So she can only call herself a pharaoh. But sometimes in the hieroglyphic text, she'll add the feminine ending to it. So per-a-a, pharaoh, per-a-a-t, and a little t at the end means female pharaoh, but it's an imperfect system. So Hatshepsut is a complete fly-by-night, really. Nothing like that before, nothing since. These Cleopatras that I'm talking about are, a confirmed dynasty of women who have official position, recognized by governors, by dignitaries, by overseas powers who need to negotiate with them. So they're working in a different kind of field, really.
There's one at the front.
Thank you, that was wonderful, but I'm still slightly crushed by the Mark Antony and drag comment. So how did we get to the Elizabeth Taylor depiction? Is that from Plutarch, or is that...
Gosh, I want to write a book on the reception of Cleopatra because every society, from the Romans to us, have claimed Cleopatra as their own. Basically, she's a blank screen, and we project whatever we want her to be onto that. So in the Renaissance, she was often depicted as a blonde Venetian courtesan kind of figure, dropping pearls into vinegar and and then by the Victorian period, she's on stage in a crinoline and a corset, and this is what we do with her. Her first forays into film was in 1918 in Hollywood with an actress called Theda Bara, who played her, and she was kind of like the ultimate vamp Cleopatra, with the black eye makeup. Theda Bara, incidentally, was actually the first kind of manufactured Hollywood actress. She was actually born Theodora Goodman in Idaho, and they christened her Theda Bara because it was an anagram for Arab death. And so, all of this was played in, and when she played Cleopatra, all the publicity was about, I feel I am her, she inhabits my body. And so there we've got this whole, spate of on-screen Cleopatras. The Liz Taylor one, I suppose, is basically just reflecting what the sexual politics of the 1960s, where we're getting the start of a liberated woman. For instance, if you look back at the 1930s Cleopatra, Cecil B. DeMille, which is my favorite, it's a kind of art décor spectacle. Cleopatra there, played by Claudette Colbert, is a kind of Fifth Avenue New York socialite. So Cleopatra morphs with whatever we want her to be at any one given time. And this is what I wanted to do, a deep dive. And for me, finding her signature is the most remarkable thing, because that's the closest we're ever going to get to the real woman. And she's not all, gold lame and sparkly eyeliner. She's actually just saying, she's signing a very bureaucratic document. And that's the Cleopatra I want to know more about, really.
And how would you cast her today?
Gosh, there have been so many attempts, isn't it? I think casting Cleopatra, like casting Helen of Troy, is an impossibility because she is all things to all people. And we've all got our perceptions of what beauty is and so forth, oh, gosh. I don't know how you would begin, but one thing I would say is to any prospective Hollywood producer listening to this, is that please don't make her look like some pharaonic queen of the 18th dynasty, you know, all in gold armor with these towering crowns. She was a Greek. She wore Greek clothing. You know, and then probably little bits of Roman influence came in as well. When she wore the Egyptian stuff, it was fancy dress for state occasions. But, you know, she was Greek. Her name that she gave herself was Cleopatra Philoptores, which means the lover of her father or of her homeland. And I often wonder, what was that homeland to her? Was it Egypt or was it Macedon, really, you know, where she came from? And incidentally, the name Cleopatra is interesting in itself as well, why they call this dynasty of women this name, because it never changes. It's always Cleopatra. We know that historically, Alexander the Great's sister, the woman he loved the most probably in his life, was called Cleopatra. And I think that, therefore, the reactivation of that name was obviously harking back to the birth of the Macedonian dynasty, really. And the name itself means, kleos, of course, is Greek for glory, renown. And if we put the patra bit into its right case, patros, means, of course, of the father or of the fatherland. So again, you know, Cleopatra is the renown of the fathers, or renown or glory of the fatherland. Or if you wanted to make it into a little sort of diminutive, it actually meant daddy's girl, which is cool.
That's great. So Cleopatra's came out a few years ago.
This came out in 2022.
So what have you been working on since then, and what is coming out next?
Okay, so the next big one to come out, and big one is coming out, is my book. It's called Babylon, the Mother of All Cities, and that will be out in May, I believe, May 26.
And just give us a little glimpse of what it's going to be.
Well, it's a real sort of longue durée history of ancient Babylon, from its foundation with Hammurabi and the law codes, looking at things like the Tower of Babel, the biblical influence, or Babylon in the Bible is all in there, Nebuchadnezzar. There's really some nice chapters I really enjoyed writing on daily life in Babylon, how people lived, you know, things like taverns and refuse collection and all of that kind of stuff, which I love. And then it goes right the way through to the fall of Babylon, and by the Roman period, Babylon had just disintegrated back into dust. But I also then look at the legacy of Babylon in Western civilization as well. So again, Babylon and the Bible, the book of Revelation, the whore of Babylon, London, or great cities, you know, Paris, New York, all take on this epithet of Babylon as well. Right the way down to reggae, the use of Babylon by Saddam Hussein, all of this kind of thing as well. So it's a long, long history of Babylon.
Wow, it sounds great. And when will it be out?
So hopefully in the spring 26.
Oh,
yeah,
right,
yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Well, we'll make a note of that.
Nearly there.
Well, Lloyd, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. And I mean, it's been absolutely fascinating. So I hope that you're going to sign my copy.
You bet.
And for people in the audience, there are going to be copies of the book that you can buy in the Rainey Hall, and Lloyd will be there for a little while anyway to sign any copies that you'd like to have signed. There's also the cafe is open there too, if you'd like to get some food or coffee or whatever you'd like, but all in the Rainey Hall. And just to let you know too that our next event here is at 1 o'clock when Manya Wilkinson will be talking to Hannah Holtschneider. So I hope people will come back for that too. So finally then, it's been an amazing hour, and I have loved everything that you've talked about. I really love reading this book.
Thank you.
I mean, I just, couldn't put it down. So I love all of those details. But can we thank Lloyd for such an interesting event?
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you. Thanks, Alan.